Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Now, I know a lot of you listen to these stories late at night, sometimes even drifting off to sleep while they play. But tonight's theme might keep you awake. Let me ask you a question. What if you tried to sell your home, but the house itself refused to let you go? Tonight, we'll dive into 12 chilling true testimonies from families and homeowners who discovered that their houses weren't just haunted, they were possessive. Every open house, every inspection, every signed contract was met with something darker. Before we begin, take a second to drop a comment below and tell me, how long have you lived in your current home? And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy these stories. It helps us keep the channel going. Now, dim the lights, settle in, and let's begin. It started like any other listing. A quiet colonial house built in the late 1800s, tucked behind overgrown hedges and an iron gate that had long since rusted into place. The owners, a middle-aged couple who had inherited the property, wanted it sold quickly. The husband admitted he never liked spending the night there. He'd stay only long enough to mow the lawn or check the pipes, and then they'd leave again for their apartment in the city. So, like anyone would, they called in a real estate photographer. The photographer, let's call him Daniel, had done this hundreds of times. His job was to make even the gloomiest houses look bright and welcoming. But from the moment he set foot inside, he said something felt wrong. The air was heavy, damp, as though the walls themselves had been sweating. Every floorboard creaked, no matter how lightly he stepped. And in the corner of every room, he felt the faint impression of someone watching. Still, work was work. He set up his tripod, adjusted his wide-angle lens and began shooting. Living room, kitchen, upstairs hallway. Each frame, crisp and clean through the viewfinder. But when he checked the playback screen, strange things began happening. Whole files were missing. Some photos appeared only as static, grey static like an old television with no signal. Others refused to save at all. No error message, no explanation. They simply disappeared from the memory card the moment after the shutter clicked. Frustrated, Daniel tried again. Different angles, different lenses, even his backup camera. But still, room after room, the files would not hold. All except for one. The attic. That shot saved every single time. At first he thought nothing of it. Just another angle, another dusty space. But when he zoomed in, he saw it. A figure. At the far end of the attic, half hidden in shadow, stood what looked like a tall, gaunt person. No face, just the outline of a body, shoulders slumped, head tilted slightly too far to the side. Daniel swore he hadn't seen anyone when he took the photo. The attic had been empty. Still, maybe it was a trick of the light. He convinced himself it had to be. He deleted the file. Then he reshot the attic. Click. Save. And there it was again. The same figure. Same position. Only this time the head was tilted in the opposite direction, as though it had moved between frames. Daniel felt a chill crawl down his back. He checked the rest of the memory card, hoping to find at least one usable photo of the kitchen or master bedroom, but every single image had corrupted, reduced to static. Every image except the attic, and every attic photo contained the figure. When he handed the files over to the owners, he tried to explain. His cameras weren't malfunctioning, the house wasn't cooperating, but they barely listened. The husband only asked one question. Did it look like a man? Daniel didn't answer. He just packed his gear and left, vowing never to return. The couple later told the realtor they had stopped trying to sell, because every time a new photographer came in, the same thing happened. No images of the house would save, except for the attic, and every single photo of the attic always showed the figure. The family had been trying to sell the house for years. It was a 3-story home in a quiet neighborhood of upstate New York. large, with good bones, and a wraparound porch that should have been a buyer's dream. But every time the property neared closing, something happened. Buyers backed out, realtors quit, and paperwork never looked right. You see, in most states, there's a death disclosure section in real estate contracts. It's a page where the seller has to reveal whether a death has occurred on the property. Most of the time, it's nothing, just a box checked no. But in this house, every contract told a different story. The first time, the realtor thought it was a printer malfunction. She pressed print, and the contract slid out with bright red streaks running diagonally across the disclosure page. Not inkjet blotches, not the faint lines of a dying toner cartridge. These looked like smears. Smears that sank into the paper fibers like liquid. She shook her head, tossed it aside, and printed another. Same thing. Another. Same. Every single contract carried the red marks, but only on the death disclosure page. The couple selling the house claimed their printer was old, maybe faulty. They bought a new one. Brand new ink, brand new cables. The next contract came out clean, until page 4, the death disclosure. The same red streaks bled across the words, as though dragged by invisible fingers. The realtor didn't say anything at first. She tried to laugh it off. But when the buyer's attorney received the documents, something changed. He called in the middle of the night. His voice shook as he asked, "Who wrote on this?" Confused, the sellers asked what he meant. The attorney said the page wasn't just smeared. Across the disclosure line, the one that read, "Has a death occurred on the property?" words had appeared. Scrawled, shaky letters. Letters that weren't. Printed by the machine. They read, "Yes," and underneath, a name. The name of the wife's late uncle. The sellers were horrified. That uncle had died in the house, but it had been decades earlier, long before they inherited the property. They'd never told the realtor, never told the buyers. It wasn't legally required anymore. It was too far in the past. So how had his name appeared? After that, no contract ever came out clean. No matter who printed it, which office, which device, the same thing happened. Page 4. The disclosure. Red streaks. The word yes. Sometimes with the uncle's name, sometimes with another. Names the sellers didn't even recognize. Every buyer that saw the papers backed out immediately. Some swore the red marks were still wet when the pages were handed to them, staining their fingertips like blood. The sellers tried digital contracts, emails, PDF signings, but when buyers printed them at home, the same thing happened, always on page 4, always red. It was as if the house itself wanted the truth recorded. That death still lingered there. And until it was acknowledged, it wouldn't let anyone else move in. The buyers were excited. It was an old craftsman home on a tree-lined street, built in the 1920s. Original woodwork, stained glass windows, a wide front porch. The kind of house people dream about restoring. But before they could finalize the sale, the property needed inspection. And that's where things began to unravel. The inspector, a seasoned man named Carl, had been through hundreds of homes. He prided himself on his sharp eye for detail. Faulty wiring, mold in the crawl space, weak foundations. He'd seen it all. Nothing rattled him. But as he climbed the staircase to the second floor of this house, something strange tugged at his thoughts. He counted out of habit. He always did. 1, 2, 3. By the time he reached the landing, he'd stepped on 12 stairs. Perfectly normal. He jotted a note about the slightly loose railing and moved on. Later, when he descended, he counted again. 1, 2, 3. At the bottom, he frowned. 11. He thought he'd miscounted. Everyone makes mistakes. So he climbed again. 12. He went back down. 11. Again. 12 up. 11 down. Carl stopped at the bottom, staring up the staircase. Something was wrong, but he couldn't see it. The stairs looked ordinary. Dark wood, worn treads, a runner rug down the center. Nothing seemed missing. Nothing seemed added. But the numbers didn't lie. 12 steps up, 11 steps down. On his third trip, he stopped halfway, standing on the 6th step. He looked up, 6 above him. He looked down, 5 below. But when he counted again, the numbers shifted. Up, he said, 6. Down, 6. No, that couldn't be right. He crouched, pressed his hand against the riser. The wood was solid, cool under his palm. He knocked, and the sound echoed strangely, as though hollow. That's when he noticed it, the faint groove worn into the wall, as if something had dragged along the plaster, not once but count. Less times. A hand? A body? Carl felt uneasy, but he couldn't leave it alone. He climbed again, this time with his tape measure. 11 risers. Exactly 11. But when he measured the total height from floor to landing, the math didn't work. It was too tall. There had to be 12. And yet there weren't. Somewhere between the first floor and the second, a step was being erased. Carl didn't want to admit it, but the truth chilled him. This house had a staircase that took something from you. A step that existed when you climbed, but vanished when you came down. Later, when he spoke to the realtor, he learned he wasn't the first to notice. One of the previous owners had complained that guests always tripped on the stairs, always in the middle. Some swore they'd feel a tug on their ankle, like invisible fingers curling around their leg. Others refused to climb them at all. The buyers backed out. The house remained unsold. And the staircase still waits, counting differently for everyone who dares to climb it. It was supposed to be the big day. The realtor, a woman named Linda, had been working for weeks to prepare the house for its first open showing. She'd polished the hardwood floors, hired a stager to bring in bright modern furniture, even trimmed the hedges herself when the landscaping crew didn't show up. The house had been sitting on the market for months with no interest, but today was supposed to change that. Except the doors wouldn't unlock. Linda arrived early, as always. She pulled the brass key from her folder, slid it into the front door, and turned. The key fit, but the lock refused to budge. It was like turning metal into stone. Frowning, she tried the side door, then the back, then even the cellar bulkhead. Every single lock resisted, the key stiff and useless in her hand. She called the owners, who swore the locks had worked the night before. She called a locksmith, who promised to arrive within the hour, and she left her open house sign on the front lawn to let people know they could come in soon. When the locksmith arrived, he scratched his head. "These locks aren't broken. They're refusing." He tried pick sets, bump keys, even drills. Nothing. Not a single mechanism would open. Meanwhile, Linda kept glancing back toward the street. Buyers had started pulling up, couples with clipboards, families with curious children, a man in a suit holding a folded brochure. Linda waved apologetically from the porch, shouting across the lawn, "Just a few minutes!" But when she turned back toward the front door, her stomach dropped. The sign was gone. She spun around. The lawn was empty. The buyers who had been standing at the curb, gone too. No cars, no people, just silence. She called the owners again, panic rising in her voice. But as she spoke, she heard something that froze her mid-sentence. Footsteps, inside the house. Someone was walking across the upper stairs landing. The sound was distinct, the creak of old boards under weight. Her heart raced. She hung up and banged on the door. "Hello? Who's in there?" No answer. But the footsteps continued, slow, deliberate, moving toward the staircase. And then, silence. The locksmith looked pale. He gathered his tools and muttered something about another appointment before hurrying off. Linda was left alone on the porch, staring at a house she couldn't open, but that someone else was clearly inside. When the owners arrived later, their keys worked just fine. The locks turned smoothly, as if nothing had ever been wrong. The interior was exactly as Linda had left it, except for one thing. On the dining room table sat a stack of brochures for the open house. They weren't hers. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded. Each one advertised the property, but not in her name. The agent listed was someone who had died 20 years earlier, and according to the neighborhood records, that open house had never sold either. The buyers came. They always came, but no one ever left. When a house refuses to sell, the first thing most realtors do is call a stager. The owners of this particular property, a modest 2-story home in the Midwest, were desperate. They'd already lowered the price twice. Dozens of showings, not a single offer. So they hired a professional, a woman named Karen, who was known in the area for transforming even the dullest homes into something people couldn't wait to buy. Karen arrived with her truck full of furniture, artwork, and plants. She worked quickly, setting up the living room with a bright sofa, coffee table, and a cheerful rug. She added lamps to the corners, family-friendly photos on the mantel. By the end of the afternoon, the house looked warm, inviting, alive. But when she returned the next morning, her jaw nearly dropped. The entire living room had shifted. The sofa, which she had left facing the picture window, now pointed directly at the basement door. The coffee table had scraped across the rug, leaving deep drag marks. Even the framed photos on the mantel had rotated, their faces turned toward the same door. Karen frowned. Maybe the owners had moved things. But when she asked, they shook their heads. They hadn't even stayed in the house overnight. So she fixed it, moved everything back, reset the room exactly as before. That night she made sure to lock up herself. She even snapped photos with her phone as proof. But the following morning, once again, the furniture had moved. Everything. The chairs, the sofa, even the rug itself, all facing the basement door. This time, Karen noticed something worse. The door was open. Just a crack. She remembered shutting it tight. She remembered hearing the latch click. Trying to stay calm, she walked over and closed it again. But as her hand touched the knob, a wave of cold air rolled out from below. It smelled of earth, mildew, and something faintly metallic. That woo, as when she decided to stop asking questions. She staged the rest of the house. The bedrooms, the kitchen, the upstairs hallway. Everything looked perfect. And yet, every time she checked back, no matter what she arranged, the same thing happened. The dining chairs would scrape across the floor in the night, lining themselves up toward the basement. Beds would shift on their frames, angled toward the same direction. Even the decorative plants bent their leaves unnaturally toward that single door. It was as if the house itself was trying to point downward, toward whatever waited in the dark below. When she finally went down, she only made it halfway. The basement was unfinished, the kind of space where shadows seemed to pool in the corners. She reached the bottom of the stairs and shined her flashlight around. Concrete walls, exposed pipes, nothing unusual. But when she turned to go back up, she froze. Every piece of furniture in the house was now arranged at the top of the stairs. Sofa, tables, chairs. Silent, waiting. All of them facing down toward her. Karen never staged that property again. And the house never sold. Selling a house always comes down to numbers. The square footage, the neighborhood, the comparable homes nearby. All of these details come together to form an appraisal, the official value of the property. And for most sellers, that number is the final word. But for one particular house, no matter who did the math, the answer never changed. The house sat on a quiet cul-de-sac in Ohio. 2 stories, brick exterior, bay windows, and a spacious backyard. On paper, it should have been worth at least $300,000. Similar homes in the neighborhood were selling for even more. The owners were confident they'd get a fair price. But when the first appraiser came, he frowned. He measured, he compared, he pulled local records. Then he shook his head. "Sorry," he told them, "the valuation's low, way low." "How low?" the owner asked. The appraiser slid the paper across the table. $7,800. The exact price the house had sold for in 1926. The owners laughed at first. It had to be a mistake. Maybe the appraiser mixed up the numbers. Maybe he'd pulled the wrong property card. So they called another appraiser. This one double-checked everything. He used modern software, scanned comparable sales, even brought in a laser measuring tool. The process was meticulous, professional, airtight. But when the report arrived, the number was the same, $7,800. The third appraiser quit halfway through, muttering that his software kept resetting itself. Every comparable home in the database would vanish, leaving only one, the original sale record from nearly a century ago. It wasn't just the numbers. Strange things began happening around the paperwork itself. Whenever the owners printed the reports, the ink bled until the page was unreadable, except for the figure $7,800. When they tried to email the PDFs, the files corrupted. When they asked for hard copies, the papers arrived yellowed, brittle, like he had been pulled straight out of an archive box. And in the margins of some reports, handwritten notes appeared. "Do not sell. Belongs to us." Neighbors said the same thing had happened to the family before them. No matter how high the market climbed, the house's value was frozen in time. The bank refused to process loans for it. Buyers walked away, spooked by what they called ghost numbers. Desperate, the owners dug into old records at the county courthouse. They learned that in 1926, the house had been purchased by a man named Edward Miller, a banker who lost everything in the crash of '29. Some say he shot himself in the study, though no death certificate was ever filed. But the most disturbing part? Every single time the property changed hands afterward, no matter the decade, the sale price on the deed always read $7,800, not a dollar more, not a dollar less. Almost as if the house refused to acknowledge inflation, time, or even reality itself. As if, to the house, it was still 1926. And Edward Miller never left. The house was charming, almost disarmingly so. A turn-of-the-century Victorian with pale blue siding, lace curtains in the windows, and a nursery painted in soft yellows and whites. From the outside, it was picture-perfect. The kind of home where new parents could imagine rocking their baby to sleep under the glow of a nightlight. But that room, the nursery, carried a secret, one that no buyer ever forgot. The owners had been trying to sell for nearly a year. Every showing went smoothly until the paperwork began. As soon as an offer was signed, whether at the kitchen table or the realtor's office downtown, something would happen inside the nursery. The air would plummet. Not just a draft, not just a chill. We're talking cellar cold, midwinter in the dead of night cold. The kind of cold that made your breath fog the moment you crossed the threshold. And here's the strange part. The furnace never stopped running. The vents pushed warm air into every other room of the house. But inside that nursery, frost bloomed across the windows, coating the glass in white patterns like veins. The crib, the rocking chair, the mobile hanging above, everything glittered with ice. One realtor tried to downplay it. She laughed nervously, told the buyers it was just an insulation quirk. But when she laid her hand on the crib rail, Her palm came away red and raw, as if she'd touched bare metal in the snow. The buyers tore up their offer on the spot. It happened again with the next family. They signed, excitement glowing on their faces, already planning paint colors and baby names. But that same evening, when they came by to measure the upstairs windows, they heard it. The nursery door rattled. When they opened it, a gust of freezing air slammed into them so hard their eyes watered. The rocking chair inside was moving, slow and steady, as if someone had just stood up from it. The famille. I ran, never to return. The owners were baffled. They checked the HVAC system, hired contractors, even installed space heaters. But no matter what, the moment ink hit paper on a new offer, the nursery transformed into an icebox. Neighbors whispered about the history of the house. That 50 years ago, a young couple had lived there. They'd painted the same nursery, filled it with the same dreams. But their baby had fallen ill during a brutal winter. Pneumonia. The furnace had failed that year, and despite blankets and firewood, the child hadn't survived the cold. The mother, grief-stricken, was said to have spent weeks rocking in that same chair, refusing to leave the frozen nursery. Some claimed she whispered lullabies until her voice gave out. Others swore she never left the room at all, and maybe she still hasn't. Because to this day, whenever a new family tries to claim the house, the temperature drops. As though the nursery itself is reminding them, this room already had a child, and it won't hold another. It was one of those houses that seemed perfect on paper. A quiet neighborhood, a large backyard, fresh paint and refinished floors. The owners were sure it would sell quickly, and when a buyer named Mr. Hayes came along, things looked promising. From the start, though, something about him seemed off. He walked the property with unusual confidence, not like someone viewing it for the first time. He strolled through the rooms as if retracing familiar steps, running his hand along the banister, pausing at the kitchen counter, as though he already had a coffee mug sitting there. When the realtor asked what he thought of the place, Hayes smiled faintly. "It'll do," he said. "It's just how I remember it." That choice of words nagged at her, but she didn't press. The sale moved forward quickly. The inspection was scheduled for the following week, and Hayes seemed eager to finalize. But then something strange happened. The night before the inspector filed his report, the realtor received an email. It was from Hayes. In it, he listed every single issue the inspector would find. The loose tile in the upstairs bathroom, the hairline crack in the foundation, the frayed wiring in the attic junction box. All perfectly accurate, even down to the inspector's offhand note about the furnace filter being overdue for replacement. But here's the thing, Hayes had never seen that report. No one had. It hadn't been uploaded yet. When the realtor confronted him, he just shrugged. "I already knew. I live here, remember?" Confused, she tried to correct him. "You don't live here yet. The sale hasn't even closed." But Hayes tilted his head and smiled. "Oh, it closes next Thursday. At 3:17 p.m. I signed the papers. I've already moved in." The realtor felt her stomach knot. "What are you talking about?" she asked. His reply chilled her. "You'll see. You were there." True enough. The deal fell apart. Days later. Hayes never returned calls, never showed up for closing. The owners were furious. But what unsettled the realtor most was what happened afterward. Because on Thursday, at exactly 3:17 p.m., she received a text from an unknown number. It was a photo. The front porch of that house. In the photo, the door was wide open, and standing in the threshold was Hayes, his suitcase at his feet. She rushed to the property. The owners were with her, unlocking the door. They swore they'd been inside that morning. Nothing unusual. But when they stepped into the living room, something was waiting on the floor. A coffee mug, half full, still warm. No one ever saw Hayes again. And the house? It's still on the market. Realtors whisper about it late at night. How every potential buyer asks the same strange question before leaving: what happens here? Next week. Every house sale has paperwork. Contracts, title records, disclosure forms, stacks of documents that most people sign without a second thought. But for one property outside Baltimore, the paperwork wouldn't stay blank. The house itself seemed ordinary, a red brick colonial with black shutters and a tidy front lawn. But every time a new buyer tried to close the deal, something happened with the legal documents. It started with a title company clerk. She was processing the disclosure forms, the standard sheet where sellers list known defects, past renovations, and of course, deaths on the property. She swore she'd left the page clean. But when it came out of the printer, words had appeared. Not typed in the system, not written in ink. They were etched. In shaky black letters, across the section marked History of the Property, appeared a note. Sale rescinded, October 14th, 1953. The clerk thought it was a system glitch, until she noticed the date matched a line in the county archives, an old deed that had indeed been cancelled that exact day. But no one had entered that information. The sellers hadn't even known about it. Over the next week, more words appeared. Different versions of the document, sometimes emailed, sometimes faxed, sometimes fresh from the copier, all bearing strange, unwanted additions. Buyer withdrew. March 2nd, 1977. Contested will, January 6th, 1989. Fire undisclosed. Basement, 2004. Each line corresponded to real events. Events buried deep in legal records, never listed in the current disclosures, and never entered by human hands. One night, a paralegal stayed late, determined to catch the glitch in action. She set the disclosure on the desk and left the printer running. At 11:37 p.m., she heard it. The faint tap of keys. When she crept back into the office, her heart nearly stopped. The computer was typing on its own letters form, deliberate, slow, filling the blank disclosure with words no one in the room had spoken. The final line read, "Sale rescinded. Cause, occupant refuses to leave." But the property had been vacant for over a year. When the paralegal showed the document to her supervisor, the text was gone. The page was clean again. But she swore it had been there, and the printer logs confirmed an extra page had been produced, with no digital record of its creation. Buyers grew uneasy. Each time a new offer came through, the disclosures twisted themselves into warnings. One packet arrived with crimson smudges across the margins, spelling out a single word: stay. Another bore a signature none of the parties recognized, the looping scrawl of a man who'd been dead for 60 years. And yet the county recorder's office still stamped them as valid, as though the house itself had a voice. No deal ever closed, not officially, because every time the ink dried, another disclosure appeared, another rescission, another warning that the property wasn't ready or willing to let go. And if you ask the clerks at the title office, they'll tell you the same thing in hushed tones. That house doesn't need a realtor. It already has a lawyer, and he's still practicing. Technology is supposed to make real estate easier. With 3D scanners and virtual tours, buyers can walk through a property without ever leaving their couch. Every doorway, every wall, every window is mapped in perfect detail. Nothing is supposed to hide. But one house refused to play along. It was a colonial revival in Massachusetts, built in the 1910s, with dormer windows and a steep roofline. The owners were eager to sell, so the realtor hired a company that specialized in Matterport scans, the kind that let buyers take a virtual tour online. The technician, a man named Evan, set up his tripod in the foyer. The scanner swept the room with its quiet hum, gathering data point by point. He moved it into the living room, then the kitchen, then upstairs. Everything looked fine through the lens. But when Evan uploaded the files later that evening, something was so wrong. The model had generated rooms that didn't exist. At first, he thought it was a rendering glitch. Sometimes the software stitched walls oddly, creating warped corners or phantom hallways. But this was different. These weren't distortions. They were fully formed spaces, complete with flooring, trim, and shadows. One in particular caught his attention. A narrow room, tucked behind the upstairs hallway. It wasn't on the blueprints. It wasn't on the walkthrough. And yet the 3D scan showed it clearly. A square space, no more than 8 feet wide, with a single chair in the center. And in that chair, a figure. Not crisp, not detailed. More like a silhouette, seated, shoulders hunched forward, waiting. Evan replayed the scan, convinced he was seeing things. But each time, the figure appeared. Same shape, same posture. The realtor, uneasy, asked the owners about it. "There's no hidden room," the husband said firmly. "We've lived here 20 years. We'd know." But the realtor pushed further. She brought in a conte, racked her with a stud finder and measuring tape, and sure enough, the upstairs hallway measured longer on one side than it should have. Behind the plaster, something hollow lingered. They tore back a section of drywall. The hidden room was real. Dust choked the air as light spilled inside for the first time in decades. The wood floor was warped, the wallpaper peeling in faded patterns. And in the center of the room sat a single chair. Empty, no figure, no silhouette. The realtor laughed nervously, relief washing over her. But when Evan checked his scan again, his face drained of color. The figure was still there. Only now, it wasn't sitting. It was standing in the doorway of the hidden room, watching. The owners pulled the house from the market that night. The contractor sealed the wall again. And the virtual tour? It never went live. Because even when Evan deleted the files, the model kept regenerating itself. Each time, the figure was a little closer, and eventually, it wasn't in the hidden room at all. It was in the foyer, waiting by the front door. It was a Sunday afternoon when the owners decided to try something new. Their house had been sitting unsold for months. A lovely Victorian on the edge of town, restored with care. Original wood trim, antique chandeliers, even the old fireplace polished to a shine. Yet every showing ended the same. No offers, just uneasy glances and excuses. So the realtor suggested a virtual open house. Interested buyers could schedule a private slot, ring the doorbell, and take a tour with the agent live on video. The house had a modern security system, complete with a ring camera mounted by the front door, so the owners could monitor everything remotely. That evening, the footage captured something no one could explain. At 7:42 p.m., the doorbell rang. The motion alert pinged on the owner's phone. He tapped play. On screen stood a man and a woman. They were sharply dressed, though oddly out of place. The man wore a dark wool suit with a bowler hat, his shoes polished but scuffed at the toes. The woman clutched a small handbag, her hair pinned beneath a cloche hat. Their clothes looked like something from the 1930s, dated, worn, yet impossibly crisp, as though they'd just stepped out of a black and white film. They leaned toward the camera, and the man cleared his throat. "Good evening," he said, his voice grainy, distorted by static. "We'd like to see the parlor." The parlor. The house didn't have a parlor, at least not anymore. That room had been remodeled decades earlier into a modern family room. The realtor, confused, hurried to the door to greet them. But when she opened it, no one was there. The porch was empty. The street was silent. She checked the ring footage again. The couple was still standing there, waiting patiently, gazes fixed on the door. And then, They stepped inside. The camera should have lost them after the threshold, but the footage continued. The man and woman walked through the entryway as if the camera were following them. They didn't glance at the walls or the furniture. They simply moved with purpose, straight toward the family room. When they reached the center of the room, they stopped. The man pointed to the far wall, the one where the original parlor doors had once stood. The woman whispered something. The audio cracked, garbled, but one word came through clear: home. Then the screen went black. When the realtor checked the house minutes later, she found something that made her skin crawl. Coal dust. Fine black smudges trailed across the polished hardwood floors, footprints leading from the entryway to the family room. But they didn't turn back. They simply ended at the wall. The owners tried to scrub the marks away, but no matter how hard they cleaned, faint outlines remained. And each time the Ring camera recorded at night, the couple returned. Always dressed the same, always asking to see the parlor, always leaving footprints that stopped at the wall. For months the house sat unwanted. Dozens of buyers toured it, a few even made offers, but somehow every deal collapsed. Financing fell through, buyers got cold feet, or contracts mysteriously voided themselves. The owners were on the verge of giving up when their realtor called with unexpected news. An offer had come in. And not just any offer, a full cash offer, above asking price. No contingencies. The strange part was the name on the account. It wasn't a person, it wasn't a company. The account holder was listed under a street name: Hollowbrook Lane. The owners frowned. That wasn't even the house's current address. But decades earlier, before the town expanded and renamed streets, that was exactly what it had been called. At first, the owners thought it was a prank, but the bank confirmed the funds were real. The money was sitting in escrow, ready to transfer. All that remained was their signature. The owners hesitated, uneasy, but with bills piling up and no other options, they agreed. That night, the house grew restless. At exactly midnight, the basement door unlocked with a loud click. The wife swore she had bolted it earlier. She crept to the hallway, listening. The knob trembled, slow at first, then with deliberate force, as if someone on the other side was testing it. Her husband joined her, clutching a flashlight. When he swung the beam across the basement door, the lock slid back on its own. The door eased open. Cold air poured out, thick and damp, carrying the smell of soil. The couple backed away as the light flickered overhead. Then they heard it. Footsteps. Not climbing the stairs, not moving at all, just pacing endlessly on the basement floor. The husband called out, demanding to know who was there. No answer came, only the sound of movement in the dark below. Desperate, they slammed the door shut and wedged a chair beneath the knob. But when Hay turned around, something was waiting on the dining room table. A new contract. Printed on yellowed paper, the ink faded but legible. Across the top, in bold letters, Hollowbrook Lane, deed transfer. And beneath it, a signature. A name neither of them recognized. The date? 1924. The paper trembled in their hands, the signature bleeding darker, as though it had just been written. They dropped it and ran upstairs, locking themselves in the bedroom until sunrise. The next morning, the realtor called again. Her voice was trembling. The buyer had withdrawn the offer. The funds were gone. The account had vanished. And yet, the basement door was wide open. The contract still sat on the dining table. And across the blank lines where their signatures should have been, two names had appeared. Their own. And that brings us to the end of tonight's collection of haunted house encounters. Which of these stories gave you the worst chills? Was it the buyer who already lived there, or the contracts that bled through? Let me know down in the comments. I love reading your thoughts after each video. If you enjoyed this one, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next set of true horror stories. Until next time, sleep well, if the house lets you.